Welcome to the Guest Writers Series. My name is Jackie Balderrama. I'm the administrative assistant helping to coordinate this series with creative writing administrator Alan Borst. Today, we are thrilled to welcome Diana Khoi Nguyen and Mei-mei Berssenbrugge. Please know a recording will be available on the Use Guest Writers Series main webpage. For tonight's program, we will begin with introductions by Jessica Tank and Jessie Cohn, after which our guest writers will each share a brief reading and then engage in a conversation moderated by Professor Catherine Coles. We'll conclude with a Q&A from select graduate students and then open it to everyone. Please note the Q&A function has been enabled at the bottom of your screen. We also encourage you to purchase books by the authors at your local bookstore. Links to purchase Ghost of by Diana Khoi Nguyen and A Treatise on Stars by Mei-mei Berssenbrugge at King's English Bookstore here in Salt Lake City will be in the chat as soon as I finish speaking. The Guest Writers Series was made possible through the University of Utah's English Department and received funding from Salt Lake County Zoo Arts and Parks Program and Utah Humanities. Utah Humanities empowers groups and individuals to improve their communities through active engagement in the humanities. This series is also supported by Utah Arts and Museums with funding from the state of Utah and the National Endowment for the Arts. I'd like to welcome Jessica Tank to turn on her microphone and camera as she introduces Diana Khoi Nguyen.
Thanks, Jackie. So it is hard to imagine a time when the work of a poet like Diana Khoi Nguyen could be more sorely needed. Art that stunningly sounds, maps, enacts, and does battle with grief. Nguyen's debut poetry collection, Ghost of, which was a finalist for the National Book Award and the LA Times Book Prize, and received the 2019 Kate Tufts Discovery Award and the Colorado Book Award, is one of those rare works that is as much visual art as it is poetry. In Ghost of, it is not just astonishing use of voice and lyric, but formal innovation, white space, and the repetition of blurring, morphing family photos that haunt, invite us into emptiness, into absence made palpable. What is an apparition, and what is material, present? Ghost of invites us to ask. What is a maze if there is nothing to find in the maze? The speaker wonders, and in doing so, devastatingly evokes the recursive, haunting nature of the grief that follows her brother's loss by suicide. With this book, Nguyen faces down both the unanswerable and the fathomless, and somehow makes them sing. Nguyen's poetry and prose have appeared widely in magazines and journals, such as Poetry, American Poetry Review, and Pen America. A Kundiman Fellow, Nguyen's other honors include awards from the 92Y Discovery/Boston Review Poetry Contest, Key West Literary Seminars, and Academy of American Poets. She has held scholarships and fellowships from the Breadloaf Writers Conference, Sewanee Writers Conference, and Provincetown Fine Arts Work Center. Currently, she teaches creative writing at Randolph College, low residency MFA, and is an assistant professor at the University of Pittsburgh. It's my honor to introduce Diana Khoi Nguyen.
Thank you, Jessica. Thank you for everybody who's here on this Monday afternoon / evening / morning, depending on your time zone. I'm also really grateful to Alan and Kate and Mei-mei for just being here and generating the space. Okay, so I guess I'll dive in. I'm going to share my screen. I'm reading two poems tonight, both that come in the kind of afterlife of Ghost of, but it's still a continuation of thinking about family and the archive. Okay. So I've been working on this series called Beside, and I find myself every year when I revisit the anniversary of my brother's death, looking at these photographs where he cut himself out and looking at the lines made by the X-Acto knife and also what remains. So there's a part of a hand, there's a part of a shoe. And I found myself thinking about the people who remain and what's contained in their bodies from whatever year this is, because those who survive are no longer the same people in the photograph. So I'll read this series, or parts of it. Some parts are not really possible to be read. Beside, Eshu. On this side of language, can I look forward as well as back? As babies in pictures, he and I were twin copies. When I saw him, I saw myself. I saw him in me. In myself, I see our mother now. Here I see two of me simultaneously. In a hand I know as I know my own, deft, and how sure it cuts. Her mother wears a similar frock on her honeymoon, long before her daughter's, before his death. She stands on these steps, a middle child. What holds her? Who keeps her anchored in space to this place? If we accept the camera's record, let it be known how she staged each of us, every gesture. We couldn't say no. Photographs trigger ones not taken, pictures forgotten in our minds. She cannot remember what she has done. What did she do to deserve such wretched children? She knows now she wasn't meant for this, didn't mean to do any of it. Let her undo it. Let it be undone to her, to all of us. The war, how it foreshadows. So in thinking about the archive, I also came across last summer a picture of just some of my aunts and uncles in Vietnam. And this came because of a time of transition. My grandmother, who is aging, is kind of moving between her children's kind of homes. And there is some drama there, which I won't go into. And there's 10 aunts and uncles kind of total. And so these are the two eldest brothers. This is my mother, and this is her older sister. And I found myself thinking about the scholar Tina Komp's book, Listening to Images, and the kind of vibrational resonance that exists in kind of another dimension when we look at the archive, and how do we attune ourselves to that archive and what presents itself. So I was kind of working with that. So I'll read this, and then I'm really excited to hear from Mei-mei and to be in conversation with her. So thank you again for listening. And I guess watching. Tug. Of a photograph, Bart's studium tells what has happened as it was happening. This one split second back in time. I travel back in time to return to a place. I've never been to a place which had to exist in order to exist on film. In my mind now, do I see the moment, the stadium, a field where grass grows far past my mother's young ankle, the rear of an automobile parked beside the boundary of trees. Upon my own childhood 30 years later, can I map this terrain, the grass, the open field, children's bodies in motion, testing what their bodies are made of, because they can, because it feels good to do so, to strive in this way. 4 bodies, 2 brothers facing off, a sister each at their side. These are the facts of the photograph. The striped shorts, plaid smock variations on the noses of my grandparents. Knowing what I know today of my uncles, these 2 brothers, I am both surprised them as they are, as they ever were. That is to say, the same bodies they foreign to them, like a patient who upon waking up, anesthesia retains no sensation, and so she traces its previously could not have been known. Smooth stretches, bumps, working permit movement. She touches stranger as if her dead these bodies dead, and people very much them now and yesterday, and evidence of who will die, but now here in the photograph and present moment they exist. But what strikes me is how they hold each other, which is a way in which they hold themselves together securely, so that the grasp does not come loose. 4 hands in contest held in 2 knots. To embrace is also to secure, which also keeps another's body in place, in time, for the time being, until somebody lets go or breaks free. Is the love of a sibling pure until somebody realizes they hadn't been able to see things all too clearly? And so the fog of the family lifts, but just for a moment, because when your country is at war, you do not have time to consider how to love your brothers cautiously, because it's black and white. Isn't it the photograph, the war, the decision to keep on living? Even though you couldn't say why or what for, I cannot speak for my mother or her brothers or that which had happened, that which will have happened by the time they uncover this photograph in the country where they are born, where they are parents of children whom they pitted against each other in proxy competition. Here where I belong, I long to hold my hands around my brother's waist as I did when he was young, presence around an absence. I hold my hands, picture us in her embrace, in this space. Thank you.
Mei-mei Berssenbrugge's newest book of poetry, like Earth in photographs evoked in the poet's patient and rapturous line, has, quote, the organized, self-contained look of a living being. The poem continues, trust that when Earth moves, you move in sync. Days fill with splendor, and Earth offers its pristine beauty to the expanding present. The present in which A Treatise on Stars has materialized is one in dire need of such expansions, and to connect with the living book that is the living being that is this book is to learn anew how to trust. She teaches us to trust our desire, our intimations and divinations. I learned to trust that my compassion can transcend the often harrowing distance between me and another being, to trust it long enough that my doubt doesn't interrupt my compassion before it has a chance to exist, to trust we are in sync long enough to begin to become so. Our desire for light, for consciousness, she writes in another poem, is pulled from the transcendent domain of potentia by the needs of environment herself. The book seems to exist in virtue of this incalculable communal potentia. It exists because we are a community, dolphins, poodles, sisters, extraterrestrials, stars, corn snakes, earth, poet, reader. We need it. We long for the kind of interconnectedness it teaches us to hold and behold. Through 14 books of poetry, Berssenbrugge has constellated the vision, wisdom, erudition, and radical invocational compassion one finds in A Treatise on Stars, published by New Directions earlier this year and recently named a finalist for the 2020 National Book Award. The Heat Bird from 1983 earned Berssenbrugge an American Book Award, Empathy from 1989, a Pan West Award. I could go on and on with awards and publications. She is also the author of Nest from 2003, I Love Artists from 2006, and Hello the Roses from 2013, which was my introduction to her work and also the beginning of a bridge to her acquaintance, though I grew up just an hour or so from the Mesa in northern New Mexico, where Berssenbrugge lives with her husband, the artist Richard Tuttle. Because I'm absurdly lucky enough to have spent a few unforgettable afternoons in the company of Mei-mei, it pains me even more that we can't all gather together in physical space for this reading. That said, if anyone can help us bridge this impossible distance, it's Berssenbrugge. Everything seen establishes a relation, she writes, and also respect as a portal. Though the present moment has rendered us shimmers of light on our overused screens, I hope you'll join me in astrally projecting ourselves into the presence of Mei-mei Berssenbrugge.
Thank you, Jesse. Okay. I'm very, very happy to be here. It's so wonderful to hear live poetry. Thank you for that beautiful reading, Diana. Treatise on Stars, it came from intuition that I wanted to make a one unified ecosystem between the earth and the heavens. And the poems came after that. I like to read a poem called Wonder, which is in 5 parts. It takes place on the mesa. Well, one of the settings is on the mesa where I live in New Mexico. One summer night, walking from our house after dinner, stars make the sky almost white. My awe is like blindness. Wonder exchanges for sight. Star by star comprises a multiplicity like thought, but quiet, too dense for any dark planet between, while single stars are a feature of the horizon at dusk, caught at the edge of the net of gems. Transparence hanging on its outer connectedness casts occurrence as accretion filling in of extravagant, euphoric blooming, then being as spirit and in matter is known here to there. I go home and tell my children to come out and look. The souls of my 2 children fly up like little birds into branches of the Milky Way, chatting with each other, naming constellations, comparing crystals and fire. They exclaim at similarities between what they see in the sky and on our land. So by wonder, they strengthen correspondence between sky and home. Earth is made from this alchemy of all children, human and animal, combined with our deep gratitude. I see his dark shape moving and shifting against night's screen of stars. My little girl reaches for his lighted silhouette. Human beings are thought upward and flown through by bright birds. We believe stars are spirits of very high frequency. We feel proud our animals come from stars so dense in meaning, close to sacrament. We describe passing time in stories about animals. Star movement is named for seasonal migrations of deer, wolf, hummingbird, dolphin, and as animals, stars still walk among us. Our snake Olivia, for example, tells me there is no conflict between humans and rain because resource is all around us. A coyote loved night and he loved to gaze at the stars. I noticed one star in Cassiopeia. I talked to her, and each night she grew brighter and closer until she came to life here as a corn snake, my friend. She looks like a dancer on tiptoe, stepping around pink star blossoms, surging up after rain. Constellations are experienced emotionally as this play of self through plant and animal symbols and values. A dream atmosphere flows. Everything represented is sacred. Being moves in accord, not of time. Returning from the Milky Way, she realized crystals had fallen from her bag and looked up. My story links a journey to sky with the creation of stars, in which place accommodates becoming. Chama River flows north-south to the horizon, then straight up through the Milky Way, like water moving beneath a riverbed that's dry. Abiquiu Mountain, El Rito Creek, coyote, snake, rainbow and rain, spider and hummingbird identify equivalent spiritual placements above. So wherever we go, there is company, nurture from every star in our regard. I start up to ask my birds to return home and find our land continuous with a starry sky mapped as entities who set into motion occurrence here. Place awaits an imprint from this potential, even though starlight arriving now already happened. What happens is a depth of field, before and after drought, fire, storm disruption. I move at high speed, but I'm still standing beside my house in the dark. To go there, I find the place on our mesa that correlates to their tree in the sky and leap up. Space stirs as star trilliums emerge through darkness like humus. I ask one blossom to please, in the future, renew these bonds between sky and my children, so they will always hold light in the minerals of their eyes. Sun on its nightly underground journey weaves a black thread between white days on the cosmic loom, like a chord or resonance between new experience and meaning. The origin of stars expresses the underlying warp of this fabric. Summer solstice draws a diagonal across my floor, precession, weaving ground of informing spirit. So therefore, life is fundamental to stars. The reverse is well known. That's why I don't use a telescope, star charts, or glasses when I go out. I think of a place, I wait, then fly to my children. When the stargate is raised, there's a narrow door between sky and ground. But when I arrive, I find the sky solid. I can't break through to visit my starbirds and stand there wondering before dawn. Then sky vault lifts. Maybe I can slip through to find the Milky Way and see its blossoms. Then our sun appears in the crack and pushes through to the day. It's so bright, so hot. I step back and cover my eyes. I hear my mother calling. Thank you.
Thank you so much, both of you, both Mei-mei and Diana. And every time we transition, I'm reminded again of what a strange phenomenon this is, this coming through by electrons into each other's houses to share poetry. So thank you so much for doing that. For the people who are watching, mostly invisibly, what we're going to do now is have a conversation, and we're going to begin with a conversation that will come out of some questions that Diana has said she has for Mei-mei. And then the two of them will engage each other, and then I will, at some point, I hope lightly intervene with to call on people who have questions already prepared. And I may even have a question or two of my own as we go. So Diana, would you please proceed?
Sure. Thank you, Kate. Thank you, Mei-mei, for that lovely reading. I think it's one thing to encounter work in solitude between the page, right, on the page, and then another to kind of be in this like virtual space of mutual listening and witness with others. I found myself thinking a lot about, as I was listening to the poem Wonder, the kind of boundary between land and sky, human, animal, and also the stars. And I read a lot of your old interviews, which was such a delight. And I found that you mentioned this notion of boundaries, especially as it pertains to what you have shared in previous interviews about your own immune system and this kind of chemical sensitivity where the boundary of your body reacts to other kind of factors and environments. And I'm just going to read a quote here from an interview, which says, "And so my boundaries are not so clear. So I think that in your habitual everyday existence, you can have a set of boundaries, but those are arbitrary and are always in motion. You can move your wish in who you are. Your boundary can move." And I use these ideas because I think a lot about multidimensionality, how dimensions overlap with each other. In this life, we could be in this shape or this outline, but in another dimension, it could be half of you and half of a crow. I'll cut and paste this quote, this wonderful quote, into the chat, just because I'm also like a visual learner. I was really struck because I've also been reading Elena Ferrante's Neapolitan novels, where the character Lila has this thing where she talks about she sees people dissolving at their margins. And I found this other quote, Mei-mei, where you mentioned that in the margins of things, like things can kind of grow and thrive. So I'm fascinated in this kind of like idea of in the margins, but also a blurring of boundaries. And it's also a way of kind of like interconnectedness and kind of communing with like the celestial, but also like in terms of other time and space. I don't know what I'm trying to say here. This I connect to quite on a personal level. I think a lot about my brother and how it so easily could have been me who died, who took my own life, as our kind of paths were very similar in the beginning and then it diverged. So this is kind of a long-winded question, which is to say, you know, how does this notion of the physical / multidimensional boundaries like map as you continue to think about like your poetry, your wonderful bounty of books and poems? Does this relate perhaps to your use of the she pronouns and women figures as kind of various versions of yourself, which I kind of read in previous interviews? I don't know if this question even made sense. I felt like I was kind of nerding out, I guess, on your work, but I'm just curious to hear you speak a little bit more about boundaries, I guess.
Wow, thank you, Diana. Where are you? Where are you talking from?
Oh, I'm in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I had my window open, so I guess we could all hear the dog barking as I closed it.
Where are you, Kate?
I'm in Salt Lake City, Utah, in my living room. And are you on the main?
No, I'm in New York for a little bit. So, okay, well, I don't know if I have anything to add to that. I was, you know, obviously between you and me, there's a question of boundaries and identity, and if your family comes from somewhere else, and how that resonates with the boundary. And I think that is an undercurrent, of what I say. But today I was trying to work on a line that used the immune system as a way of, which the immune system is what tells what's you and what's not you, what to attack and what to welcome, but as a way of recognizing and remembering. I think the whole of the Stars book was trying to reach towards the connection of all things. So boundary would be like an articulation rather than a limit. And my husband always says there are no lines in nature. So how do you feel about boundaries, Diana?
Oh my gosh. I feel that we're all a set of, like in an anatomy book, of clear transparencies overlapped on each other. Right? Like, and sometimes our parents' transparencies are mapped onto us. And then there's like their desire and wish for us, which they try to map onto us, which we like are constantly erasing or swiping off. Can I just go back to the quote from your husband, Richard Tuttle, that there are no lines in nature? Is he talking about like a line in a drawing or like a poetic line? Could you help?
He means probably like a graphic line, yeah. He might be quoting that from somebody else, yeah.
So Mei-mei, one of my students has a question that I think really relates to the question that Diana just asked you. Diana, do you mind if I bring the student in to continue this piece of the conversation? Alan, could you give us Lindsay, please? Lindsay,
hi.
Welcome. This is Lindsay.
Hello. Thanks so much for both of your beautiful readings, and this conversation is lovely. Yeah, I mean, this is absolutely sort of related to the question I had. In quantum physics, the word entanglement describes the interaction of some particles which share something so fundamental they can't be observed or described independently of each other, even when they're separated by a long distance. It's maybe most famous, like Einstein famously called it spooky action at a distance. And I am interested in this in your work, Mei-mei, and also a little bit in yours, Diana, especially related to these quotes I found from Fred Moten, who also gets a lot of sort of poetic kind of mileage out of this concept of entanglement. He uses it as a metaphor for social relations. He describes Blackness as a social entanglement in which what seem like individuals are actually emergent properties of a larger social field. And he also says, this is him talking, I was totally invested in the possibility of spooky action at a distance because for me, that's a very interesting and accurate way to describe some of what occurs within the context of a jazz ensemble. And so this is kind of maybe constellated with what Jesse mentioned in his introduction, also what Diana has been touching on, but to me, I think your work investigates entanglement in both these kind of scientific, but also social ways. So I'm wondering if you could speak or maybe continue speaking a little bit more about the kind of role entanglement plays, or maybe just kind of connection across distance more generally in your poetry.
Yeah, I want to hear what Diana says. So briefly, oh, let me see your face.
Oh, Lindsay, come back.
I'm answering you. In that distance and that space-time, I think all time is one time. And so that naturally means that distance is also like a measuring tool, not an actual thing. So in the interconnectedness of all things, the fact that things are connected might mean that there's just that there is no distance, that distance is a conceptual crutch for us, a tool or way of mapping out how we can recognize things. And we've all experienced, knowing something that's happened far away. It just happened to me this week. I was thought of somebody a lot, and that person had just been killed. So that's all. What does Diana have to say?
I love listening to you, Mei-mei. I love this idea of like there's just one time, which I think a lot about as I'm looking through the archive, which is to say, like, not only do I see myself in the archive, even though I wasn't yet born, even when I move in my current life, I see my mother or I see my grandmother, or I probably even see like relatives I don't know or comprehend. So there's this kind of entanglement, of course, of genes, of genetic material, but not just like nature, right? Or I guess, yeah, like, sorry, not just like the familial genetic makeup, but also, I'm also like comprised of so many places where I have spent time, right? And been in the land. And also all the people that I've encountered, right? We're amalgam. We are this kind of larger web of all those interactions, whether or not we're aware of it. So I guess I think of entanglement just on like a personal being alive in the world in that way. And so of course, when I sit down to write, all the lineage of what I've been taught or read, or maybe even overheard but forgot, is also emergent and present. So for instance, sometimes I'll write a line and then later I'll like read something or reread a book, and I'll see like my line in there. And I was like, oh, that's where it came from. It's like, oh shit, I didn't know, and you never know when this stuff is gonna like pop up. And it's kind of like the one, like, I guess this, which is another way of saying like that this community, that it kind of operates in these latent and unobvious or non-latent ways. I forgot what the word is there. So I don't know if that's answering your question, Lindsay. But I love what you shared about quantum physics, because I know that Mei-mei has read some quantum physics from my research. And I want to ask also too about Mei-mei's process and the books that you read. And thank you also, Lindsay, for bringing up Fred Newton's notion of Blackness as a social entanglement. I feel like that I've been thinking a lot about that just this year, specifically this summer in the pandemic.
So one of our other students, Samantha Thailand, has a question for you, Diana, that approaches this same topic from the opposite direction almost. And so I think Alan is in the process maybe of giving us Samantha.
Hi, really glad to be here. Thank you for your readings. So my question is for Diana, but if it's interesting to you, Mei-mei, would be like thrilled to hear y'all bouncing it back and forth again. On page 21, in one of several places in Ghost of, where text has been shaped around white space in the shape of the brother's figure, excised from a family photograph, the speaker calls framing an act of enclosing, of closing yourself from your environment and all the unintended sounds. And then on page 73, the speaker asks, what if he did not depart, but we who gathered around him? I held on to these moments and found myself wondering if the poems in this book are more like water or more like containers. In a book that reflects upon the absence of a brother who has died by suicide, what does containment mean? Do you think that the process of writing this book and/or of gathering around him are attempts to contain something uncontainable? Did you find that writing this book required you to be self-contained in a way that other topics do not require?
Thank you, Samantha. I hope I can follow all the threads of that question. So forgive me if I leave some parts out, but essentially my answer is, and I think it kind of ties into Victoria Ching's question from the chat. It's just a sampling, right, of a test tube in the river, right, of grief. So yes, there is a container, something is contained, and there's water in that river that's going to continue to flow and maybe hit drought or hit deluge or whatever, right? And then also the water is also evaporative and creates the humidity in the air, which is to say it transmutes and it transforms in and around us, whether or not we can see it or move through it. So the work that I did in Ghost of is just like that one test tube in that one moment, you know, of a much kind of longer process where my thinking about family continues to course, which is what I'm doing, I think, in the current work. And so it's a process, I guess, and maybe an obsession in a way. I keep returning to it because something about it calls me to it. But also when I was writing about it, my partner, my spouse, who's really into Bruce Lee, kept sending me videos of Bruce Lee talking about the teacup, which makes its way into the book. And I'm like kind of shocked that like nobody has ever asked me about the teacup, the famous Bruce Lee, but also like a cliche line about the teacup, like that you must be the teacup or something like that. I already forget kind of the quote. But I love this notion of just not being container, but being the thing which can be contained. But then of course, nothing is really contained, right? There's steam, things are evaporating. And then there's your body, the moisture of your body as you touch the teacup. So I don't know, I think I'm deviating now, but thank you for your attunement to container and containment in the book. I don't know if I properly addressed what you were seeking, but it delighted me, so thank you.
Mei-mei, did you want to address containment, or do we want to move on to process questions? Or, so I know Diana has one for Mei-mei, and one of my students has one for Diana. So
I know with the time, I mean, the function of poetry in Ghost is so fundamental. But when we talk about time and time being one time, do you feel that way with your brother? Does your book help you to be with your brother, or does the idea of one time, you know, of entanglement that counts for the past also?
It does, Mei-mei. Thank you for asking that question. I didn't know how to access my emotions the first year after his death. So I just threw myself into work, and I had been avoiding revisiting these photographs where he cut himself out 2 years before he died. And so I was like, I have to look at this thing. And by engaging in a, conversation through text with the photograph, I found myself directly speaking to him. So it opened a door in time, right? Where I could talk to him. And we weren't, we were all estranged. I mean, he didn't talk to anybody for a few years before he died. And actually just last night, and I don't know if it's because of this event today, I had a dream. It was a really mundane dream. I was with my siblings, and my father was about to pick us up from the pharmacy. And I don't know why I was at this pharmacy with my siblings, and we were just like waiting to get our prescriptions. And there was some weird, awful like bureaucracy of like paperwork, and my siblings were getting like hung up like with the clerks at the window. And I remember just trying to assist them. And I remember there's a moment where I was like, oh, this is not the reality. Like, you are dead. you know, and we are not the three of us are actually not in the same place. But I didn't feel sad. I was like, oh, okay, that's the reality, but I'm also here and I'm going to spend time here. I feel like now I'm deviating because I'm just remembering this dream that I just had last night. But yeah, it's kind of wonderful to think of time as just one time, which is like kind of like, what's the word? Not like when you're doing like when you're super zoomed in, but when you can just kind of zoom out, and it's just the larger texture of all things that exist and then don't exist, but they do exist just in a different form, as different kind of material and matter. And that's kind of calming for me. Not all the time, of course. I can't always be so zen about it, but the thinking about that is kind of calming for me, which is again coming back to this idea of interconnectedness of things. And in thinking about your book about the stars, like there's that notion that we all have like stardust as part of in our blood, right? That we have like the cosmos that exists in us, and we are in the cosmos. So
great.
It's so great.
Something to be very happy about right now. Alan, I wonder if you can find Jess for us. Diana, Jess introduced you and she has a question about process. And while he's doing that, I'd like to key up and be a little more specific about Victoria Chang's question to both of you. So I'm going to read that, and then I'm going to bring Jessica in, and we can talk a little bit about process. So what Victoria wants to know, and I think it really relates to what Jessica is going to ask, is she says she's really fascinated, Diana, by your new work, and she wants you to talk more about the process of working on new work as an extension of past work, rather than this idea of a discrete, commercially determined concept like a book. And then I'm going to have Jessica uncloak herself and ask you her question as well. I hope that's not too confusing for me to do. Hi, Jessica. Can you unmute yourself? Thank you.
Yes. Thank you so much for those wonderful readings and this fantastic discussion. I've really been enjoying it. So my question for you, Diana, is I was amazed to discover that Ghost of was written in only 30 days in those two 15-day sessions during August and December of 2016. And I loved reading what you said in interviews about obsession and reading primarily nonfiction and watching a lot of movies during twice yearly like marathon work sessions such as these. So I'm wondering, is this still what your writing practice looks like? If not, what's changed? If it is, I wonder if you might talk a bit about the themes of the last couple of marathons. I know that in one, for instance, everything was related to sand. What was the last nonfiction piece, movie, or other media? You mentioned the documentary about eels in one interview, for instance, that inspired you, influenced your writing, or ignited obsession, and why?
Yeah, thank you, Jess. I want to loop in what I've read about Mei-mei, but also to hear about Mei-mei's process. So what I've read about Mei-mei's process of collage. What about
your process?
I'm sorry? Oh, I know. Okay. Well, but I feel like they're related. That's why I wanted to bring it in so people could know what I know about Mei-mei's process. Okay, so I'll talk about mine first, I guess. I would rather talk about Mei-mei than myself. So I've tried to break out of this only writing, for 15 days in the summer and then in the winter. So I was trying to write this semester and I failed. I failed miserably. I just there's 10 more emails that I have to take care of. I was like, you just can't do it. Just lack of discipline. I don't know what to tell you. But what I love is essentially engaging in dedicated time and deep study. Right. So I know Mei-mei, when you have a thing that you're thinking about, you'll identify various kind of texts from science and philosophy. And also I read once that you took Polaroid pictures and that you kind of just like take out, you have your notes and you assemble them and you cut them out and you assemble them on a big table. So it's a kind of collage of all the things that you're thinking about. I do the same thing. So I create essentially like a comps PhD study list. Like I just miss comps, I don't know. So I'm just doing comps every year over and over again. So this year was looking at scholars who are thinking about the photographic archive and working within the diaspora, because that's a lot of my current work. I want to think about my family, but also kind of zoom out to the larger Vietnamese and also just like refugee, various refugee kind of communities, because thinking about the refugee experience over time. So that was kind of what I was doing recently, but I don't take photographs, but I'm going to start doing that, Mei-mei, because I love this idea of like, not just working at the archive, but actively capturing stills. I love watching movies that pertain to place. And Mei-mei, you talk a lot about in your interviews about like the mesa or the tundras of Alaska, and how like that kind of those horizontal spaces have affected and influenced your own approach to like, you know, your horizontal lines and how long they are. I think the one where I did was San Just, I think I was in Texas, but also in Taos, New Mexico. I was kind of in both that summer, and I was like, it's not going to be very green. And I wanted something that dealt with like the minute particulars, but not just like dirt. I didn't want to just do dirt. So it's like, I'm going to choose sand. And so I watched like Woman in the Dunes, that Japanese film that's based on a novel. I think I watched the Walkabout movie from Australia in the 70s, because I was like, that's dirt / sand. So I just was like, how can I transport my imagination to these landscapes and then introduce work of other artists that I wouldn't normally have sought out, right? It's a kind of it's a way in which I can get myself to be exposed and populate my imagination. And then I have really cool dreams, and then I'll write, right? Maybe I don't have a table in the way that Mei-mei has her table of assemblage, but I'm trying to populate my dream life so that when I wake up the next morning, I have to write something, because in these days I have to write. So I don't know if that answered your question about process, but that's kind of what I've been doing. Yeah, I don't know, Mei-mei, has your process changed? I was really curious, like as technology has changed and evolved, has that influenced your practice at all?
Well, since I revise so much, it's infinitely better not to have to retype a page every time you change a comma. But I could tell that the dream that you were telling us about is something you're tucking away for your next, 15 days. That will be part of the deluge that comes for your. I think I famously say that, or I constantly say that I appropriate, and I write lines from books and my readings, and then I use them in my own work. But I think what's changing is I use found text as markers more and more now, but the words get in, and I still make my table, and I often, the first draft uses a found text, appropriated text, but by the time I get to the final drafts, it's completely changed. I'm more and more condensing, and so that's different than the earlier impulse, which would be just to string one found line after another. I like this Zoom, so I think it has the feeling of life, of being with each other. So
it's nice and close, isn't it? Do you mind if I read a question that we have from the Q&A texts that I'm getting? And I'm hoping to get to one question of my own, maybe during the conversation, we'll see, but this comes to us from JP Grasser. And he says that as he listened to Diana read to the syncopation and aural fragmentation, that's aural, A-U-R, fragmentation that the shapes and forms of the work demand, and listened to Diana's comments on the archive, it occurred to him that in our Zoom reading format, and we're just talking about that now, someone unfamiliar with Diana's work might mistake those syncopations for a bad connection, for the computer freezing. And he says that he knows too that you work in 4D mediums. He's wondering how you define the relationship between the digital archive with its so-called flickering signifiers and family systems, grief, and absence. And he adds his gratitude to both of you with the question.
Thank you, JP. Wow. Okay. So, yeah, I mean, I kind of love that when I pause, there's that moment of listening and you end up hearing my environment, right? So that in my pause, it becomes a kind of stencil for my rectangle world, if you will. Which calls upon maybe an accidental kind of listening, right? You come here to the space to hear poets read and talk, but you didn't realize you were also going to hear crickets, you know, I don't know, from my backyard or something. And so I actually like that. I'm not trying to recreate that, but I like that it becomes, when I think about like John Cage's 433, that becomes a kind of stencil for environment and listening to the world. Yeah, so my work in 4D mediums, I'm not sure what 4D is actually, but I do work in the digital archive. I work with home videos where my brother is still alive. He's a little boy in the digital archive, but I also work in the archive where I'm not alive. So my parents' wedding video, their honeymoon video where I look just like my mother. And there's a lot of like accidents and ghosts which appear in the digital archive. So for instance, I was just watching this video of myself playing with my siblings. And there was this moment where I just like happened to pause the video, but because it was, I think, digitized and translated from VHS to a DVD, it's kind of grainy. But when I hit pause, like there was my body and my brother's body like accidentally like mapped over each other, and we were standing in the middle of a field, but we were standing exactly where there was like a drain. And I was like, I don't know why, but this image, this still from the video just seems to encapsulate all that I'm seeking, you know, like this kind of the sieve of the field and then our two bodies on top of each other. Yeah, I don't know if I can speak anything insightful to this question and how I define the relationship, but I think of going to the archive, like hoping to, like it's as if it were some kind of divining presence or form of augury. I don't know what I'm looking for, but I assemble everything before me and I try to like listen to it. You know, I don't know if that makes any sense. And then when things kind of strike me, then I capture them down or begin to play with them. So that's kind of my personal relationship with that, which, yeah, so I'm curious to hear, Mei-mei, your response to that. Or when I read about your table assemblage, I was like, that's a kind of augury too. You know, instead of guts, it's your notes.
Well, that's true, because you kind of pass your hand over which note you're going to pick.
Can you?
I don't have.
I'm sorry. Okay. Can you two tolerate 2 more questions?
We like this.
Yeah. Okay, good. Well, I'm having a wonderful time. And so Alan, he privately back channeled me and said, do you want to stop or should we keep going? And I said, can we keep going? Let's do it. So if you guys are game, I have a couple of more. One of my PhD students whose face and voice are not present, Michelle McFarlane, has this wonderful question that I think can go to both of you, though I think she's addressing Mei-mei in it. Nope, she's not addressing anyone. She would love for you to talk a little bit about something technical, which is your use of metaphor, metonymy, and simile in work on poetics, which I think totally relates to this question of containment and boundarylessness and entanglement as well.
Yeah, I think that better go to Diana, because I've tried to write down the definitions of those a million times and I can never remember. Yeah. I have
Was
a
the
line of a poem. Um,
was the last one metonymy?
Metonymy, yeah.
Is that the part for whole? I'm just looking it up to double check.
Yeah.
I love the idea of metonymy. I love it, but I can never remember what it is.
I always get confused with like synecdoche and metonymy.
Yeah, those are the two, right, that are hardest. But I actually, so I mean, these technical terms are being named in her question, but I think that what I'm seeing, and she's not here for me to ask her to clarify, but I think she's talking about those figures that are working around the question of containment and non-containment, blurring and not blurring. So I wonder if you have anything to say about the specific technical moves that you make that either create containment or break containment down, and allow entanglement in the poems. Is that another way to put it?
I think so.
How can I say it? I think, I would say it differently, that, well, as I say, I can never remember the difference, but when you're making a comparison or connecting one thing to another, that's a kind of creativity, creative, that creates. And so I like to think about how, that's what I've been working on, a poem about plants, and I use, well, the line goes, and it's also about dream, but anyway, it's about that metaphor and correspondence create, and also it is like an entanglement, distant connection, because you put one thing and then you connect it to another thing, but it's only, it's to me it's the same as entanglement. But I think what I'm trying to say is that I'm working with this idea where metaphor is like a living, the process of metaphor is almost like a living being. So.
Thank you. Mei-mei, in your treatise on the stars, and I think it was actually in the piece that you read tonight, you say everything represented is sacred. And this is one of those statements that's both clear and kind of beautifully ambiguous, because one of the things, again, we're talking about slippage, we're talking about the refusal to contain. Is it sacred before it's represented? Is it sacred in the act of representation? And so one of the things that I've really long wanted to ask you about your work is the relationship in it between the human connection both to the nature made and also the human connection to the human made. And so I guess what I'm asking you about is your relationship to nature on the one hand and to human created art on the other hand in your work, and whether you view those things, those relationships, as the same and analogous or different. And by the way, if in human made art you want to include fashion, I would be thrilled to hear about that.
Well, fashion's taken a hit this year.
I should say.
What was the question? I think of it as the same thing.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't, I mean, I guess nature is what the oversoul of the human art, but I don't separate them.
Diana, do you want to say anything about nature made and human made in your poem? The body and the photograph of the body?
I was actually going to go somewhere else. I'm interested in, this is like not even related to poetry, but I think it is because I think about it. So therefore they converge. But when you mention human made and nature made, I think of biomimetics and engineering, right? So like the shark skin swimsuit, or I don't know, there's a very specific kind of paint that was made to be odor resistant. I don't know, like, but how we regenerate or learn from nature, but also nature is also kind of mimicking our sounds or things that we do. So there's, again, we're talking about entanglement and how evolution, I mean, there's a whole, like, the earth is truly at risk. But when I think about, there's a kind of wonder in this relationship between human and the animal kingdom, when things kind of converge, like in bird song and so forth. Yeah, so I don't know. So I was thinking about that when you mentioned fashion and nature made.
Right. We have an anonymous attendee saying that he or she loves this book, and here she does not specify which one. So I'm going to apply that to both of your books, or all of the books on the table equally. And we've imposed on your time beyond what we threatened to do already. So I'm going to thank you so much, both of you, for your generosity and for your work and the generosity of the work that you're doing every day in your rooms and sending out to us. So thank you so much. Diana, I really look forward to meeting you in person in the aftertime. And Mei-mei, I can't wait to see you then and to see what you're wearing the next time we encounter each other.
Things have changed, right? Thank you for your work, Diana. Thank you.
Thank you, Mei-mei.
She's wearing something beautiful.
Yes, she is wearing something beautiful. It shines. I love it. And now I'll give it back to Alan, who has appeared.
Yeah, so I have the honorable but lamentable task of bringing this terrific and lovely event to its conclusion today. I'd like to thank Kate Coles and Jackie Balderrama for their efforts in coordinating and planning this event with me. Thanks also to Jesse Cohn, Jessica Tank, Lindsay Webb, Sam Thielen, Michelle McFarlane for their contributions in the question and answer portion, as well as JP and our other attendees. On behalf of the University of Utah Creative Writing Program and all of our attendees here, I think we hit 50 at one point, which is fantastic and wonderful. Let me heartily thank both you, Mei-mei, and Diana. It's been wonderful to share time with you. I don't know whether we shared one time or multiple times with one another, but it's been terrific nonetheless. Thanks again for your contributions to our program and spending time with us. And to everyone out there, have a wonderful evening. We have our last full event coming up in a few weeks. On November 12th, we'll be featuring Elena Passarello. So we invite you all back for that as well. And I think that's a wrap. So thanks again, everyone. And Mei-mei and Diana, take care.
Bye-bye, 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 bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.